Hello, hello, and welcome to our weekly book club episode here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I'm your host, Amanda, and my lovely bookworm co-host is...
Hello, I'm Meagan.
So we are your messy, imperfect, secular, progressive homeschool mom friends. And this week, we're starting a new book here at Book Club. We are reading Better Than College: How to Build a Successful Life Without a 4-Year Degree by Blake Boles. Now, you know at least a little, you know Blake, and this isn't your first read of the book, right?
Correct. So I read it once about 4 years ago, and I'm excited to revisit it with fresh eyes. I'm a different parent than I was. I'm a different human than I was. I'm a different homeschool mom than I was. So I'm excited about that. But this book was huge for me on my homeschool journey. And I do know Blake. In the dedication section here, there's a thing about Unschool Adventures and a couple of other programs that Blake works with. And Unschool Adventures is Blake's company. They do 4-week and 6-week trips around the world where unschooling teens go and explore the world and have kind of these autonomous self-exploration adventures. And my kiddo went on one last year and is going on one next year with Blake. So yeah, the funny thing is I've never met him and I don't feel like I really know him, but at the same time I sent my kid to Berlin with him for a month. So I think that kind of connects us in some unique way.
Yeah, I would say you definitely know him a little bit more than most of our other authors that we've had on, right? Where we didn't actually know anyone who had met them in person. Like your kids hung out with him for a month. I think that counts as kind of knowing him. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's cool. So this book doesn't really have chapters, but rather sections. But for this week, we read about 40 pages. So we stopped this week at the section that's called What to Do Instead of College. So if you happen to be following along, that's where we are.
Yes, exactly. So, do you need to read? No. Reading along is not mandatory. We aren't that kind of book club. You're more than welcome to join and come listen to our digest of the book and listen to us kind of go back and forth on what we think and what we got from it and where we agree and disagree. However, if you would like to read along with us, there is a link in the podcast description to be able to find the book on Amazon. You're welcome to just look here on the podcast, or if it's easier to look on our social media channels, there are links in different places, the picture of the book and an easy link there. So feel free to do that. Again, it's on Amazon, so it is an affiliate link. We'll get, 10 cents if you buy it through that. And with that 10 cents, we will start building a very tiny tower of money.
Once we've split it in half between us.
I will take my nickel and you can have your nickel, and we'll wait for someone else to buy the book, and then we'll have 10 cents.
Exactly. Yes, but we do appreciate your support of our podcast when you use our affiliate links. So thank you. Yeah. All right. So yeah, let's dive in. The first thing that I noticed before we even get to the book is at the beginning, there's kind of this section where it's other authors who have talked about the book, reviewed the book and kind of shared their thoughts on it. And I liked some of the names of some of these books. So I haven't read them yet, but I highlighted them and definitely added them to my to be read list. So there's one here that's called Stop Stealing Dreams. There's one called A Whole New Mind, which sounded really interesting. Now, the next one is The Teenage Liberation Handbook. And we tried reading that for our other book club that Amanda and I are in offline, and we didn't get very far. So that one I did not highlight. There's one called The Education of Millionaires, which I thought was really interesting. And then The EduPunk's Guide to DIY Credential. And so there's just this huge list of authors that seem to kind of circle in this same sphere. And I thought, oh, these might be kind of fun. So that was kind of my first takeaway from the book before the book even started. Then, as I mentioned, he has the dedication for a couple of places that Blake interacts with teens who kind of inspired the book. It's Not Back to School Camp and Deer Crossing Camp are listed, as well as Unschool Adventures. So I'm familiar with Unschool Adventures, Not Back to School Camp. I just wanted to kind of call it out as a resource. If you are unschooling or attempting to unschool or considering unschooling, it is awesome. It's teens only. It's like 13 to 19, I think. They have a camp in Vermont and a camp in Oregon every summer. And it is just awesome. My kiddo loves that camp. So if that's something of interest, feel free to join our Facebook group or come join our Patreon chats. I'll be happy to talk to you more about both of those programs. Okay, my next thought before the book even began is in the preface here, there's some clarification that is offered. And we do, the majority of our audience is in the US. However, we do have international listeners and people from the US who aren't from the US who maybe have a different background in education. So there was just kind of a clarification here that says the word college in this book refers to a 4-year college or university that leads to a bachelor's of arts or a bachelor's of science degree. And the reason that I bring this up is we are working on transitioning our homeschool life to Europe. And my daughter was looking at this program and it was saying that she needed a college degree to get in. And she will attain her 2-year degree in about 6-7 weeks. And so she was looking at it like, is a 2-year degree enough? And I'm like, whoa, hold on. I go, I'm 99% sure that what that's referring to on that thing is actually what we consider a high school diploma and what in Italy is considered. And so we ended up going to this amazing resource in Italy for homeschooling and kind of sussing that out and asking those questions. So just for clarification purposes, if you think of college as anything else, in the US, we have 4 years of high school. Kids typically graduate around 18. This is in the traditional school system, and then go to college or university for another 4 years and graduate around 22 if they're lucky. Right? Like if they haven't gotten too distracted or had too much fun. So that is there as well if you're listening from another country. So that's before the book even started. So, and then on page 3, the actual content of the book begins. And the header for that section is, does this book deserve your time? So I think you had our first note of the day, Amanda.
I did. Now, before I say anything else, I'm going to preface with, I suddenly have the worst cough. I'm not entirely sure why my tea's not working. So I just grabbed a cough drop. I'm sorry if you can hear me sucking on it.
Slurping away.
Yeah.
I feel like too, before we start, we should have probably said this in the beginning, another preface in case this is somebody's first episode listening to us. We approach homeschool very differently. And when I was, you typed your notes in our show document before I did. And so I typed mine after the fact, and we have very different sections that we've even pulled from. So for anybody who's new or anybody who just needs a refresher, I'm Meagan. I'm the one who's a loosey-goosey unschooler. In our last episodes, we talked about manifesting your reality, and Amanda was like dying on the floor. So that's my side of things. And Amanda, you're taking a different approach, yes?
Yeah, I'm much more an academic aggressive homeschooler. And like I said, we're both secular and progressive, but we approach things very differently. And this book is going to be an excellent example of respectful discussion with very different opinions.
Yeah, I'm excited. I like it.
And then I'm going to get some kind of a book that talks about how wonderful standardized testing and college and Ivy League colleges are, and make Meagan read it and be like, oh my God, what is this crap?
I will read anything. I'm always game for a good book. Yeah. I'm game for whatever. So...
So yeah, I had the first comment. It was on page 3. The quote is, "Today, the liberal arts college experience offers many valuable things: exposure to new ideas, analytical skills, social networks, support, accountability, and the opportunity to live independently. But these things come at a high price. The average family will shell out roughly $20,000 per year for tuition and living expenses, while the average student who takes out loans will graduate with more than $25,000 in debt." I guess the first little thing to say is those numbers are very low. We'll talk about that again later. The second thing to say for me is, while I do agree that that's true, I would also say the first few, maybe even several years of adulthood, they aren't cheap for anyone, whether you're in college or trying to make a go of it outside of your parents' house, or like whatever situation you find yourself in, they aren't cheap. And it is not uncommon for young adults, the first time out on their own, making their way in the world, to find themselves in loads of debt, credit card debt, loans that they were not prepared for. Like, debt is really close to just a reality of early adulthood, especially in this day and age, I feel like. So take a little bit of issue with this idea that you're only going to have crazy amounts of debt that you have to sort through and pay off if you go to college. I feel like, well, that's an investment, kind of like people talk about buying a house. And yeah, you have a 30-year loan, but you're building equity and you're getting more out of it. And I feel like a college degree is kind of like that.
That's a good analogy. I kind of liked the quote on the next page on 4 that's still in that same section that says, when the price of oil rises, we look more seriously at alternative energy. When a business raises its prices, we consider different ways that we could obtain the same goods or services. But even though the price of college has skyrocketed, we flood its gates. Why? And so I thought that is interesting, right? That there's such a connection, a cultural connection and a societal connection to the concept of higher education, that no matter what these universities have done as far as pricing and the bonkers process for admission and all that kind of stuff, people are still like, whatever you say, we'll do it, you know? And with so many other industries, they would have priced themselves out of business, or somebody would have come up with an alternative that would have shut them down or made them change their ways or made them adjust and become more flexible. So I thought that's pretty interesting.
I mean, I see your point, but I look at gas cars in the United States and how much people are absolutely like, I don't care that hybrids are available, and I don't care that electric vehicles are available. Like, you can pry my gas car out of my cold, dead hands, even though gas is $4.50 a gallon. Like, so I don't know. Yeah. We're pretty slow to actually embrace things, even if we go looking. Like, there's the early adapters and then there's everyone else. And I feel like, I don't know if it's especially in the United States. I'd have to really think about that. I want to be careful about what I say, but for sure in the United States, we're quite slow to actually embrace new ideas and big shifts and changes like that, even when it is very expensive.
That's true. I just feel like people squawk about the price of so many things right now, which is valid. It's very expensive to be alive right now, but people are looking at making much smaller changes. But for so many people who were committed to going to college or sending their kids to college anyway, that is not something that would be a consideration for budget cutting. And of course, there are ways to do college more affordably, right? We've talked before. I'm a huge proponent of community college. There's so many ways to do college more affordably. It doesn't have to be the mega expense that it is for so many. There's companies that you can work for and that have tuition reimbursement programs and all kinds of stuff out there. But I thought that was an interesting quote.
Yeah. And I would say too, just like everything else, if you take the time to research it and you know what you're doing and you find good resources, there are more affordable ways of doing it. And even taking out the loans, whether you are able to make them all federal government loans and the steps that are necessary to make that happen versus private loans, and the difference between private loans and federal loans and all of those kinds of things. I think so many people got into real trouble by consolidating their loans with for-profit companies, and that has created this whole other really bad situation. And, you know, we live in a capitalist society and a capitalist country. No matter how much people might try to say that the leading Democratic candidate is actually a Marxist, communist, whatever, like, she is a capitalist through and through. Come on, you know, both parties, they're capitalists, and they twist the truth to make profit a lot of times. And so you do have to be really careful about that. And that's hard. That's hard for everyone, but especially the people who are tackling these kinds of things for the first time, right? If you're a first generation college student, you don't know these things, these ins and outs, and you're the ones that get taken advantage of the most. And that's a really shitty situation, I think. So I think it's important to acknowledge that. So just after Meagan's quote, still on page 4, the second kind of section says, proposition number 2, higher education and college are not the same thing. And I absolutely agree with that. And I think ideally, everyone would constantly continue to educate themselves. In an ideal world, people would always be looking to learn more, to know more, to better understand things, to understand the new way things are being done, and just that constant, like, higher education aspect of it without actually needing the college side of it. Now, that said, much of what's going to come out of my mouth during this episode, and I'm sure the next few episodes of Book Club, very much come from the fact that I come from a very working class family, and in some regards, like lower working class family. And my parents worked really hard to improve their station and to give my siblings and I an improved station over that. So I was the first person in my family to go to university. I'm the only one that got a 4-year degree. And I see in my family and other people that I am close to and that I've grown up with or that I know that like a lack of a 4-year degree can really significantly limit job opportunities in the US. Even when you have loads and loads of experience, even when you have loads and loads of certifications and qualifications, if you don't have that basic 4-year degree, it can make getting a job that you're really entitled to significantly harder. And so for me, that's where a lot of my thoughts and ideas come into play in this whole discussion. So I'm just going to put that out there, right? Like not everyone is coming from that place, right? Not everyone is a first generation college grad and has seen their parents struggle and their siblings struggle and all of that kind of thing. And so, you know, we only know what we know and we try to learn and understand other perspectives, but that's where a lot of mine comes from.
Yeah. So I think there's two things that we can look at in the book. We can look at the theory, which is in a lot of ways, I love the theory, right? That self-directed education and how rich it can be and this, that, and the other thing. And we are unschoolers. I mean, we are following this thing. Having said that, all 3 of my kids in high school have college experience already. So I'm not anti-college, but I think this book takes into account either the choice to go in a different direction after your kind of formal process of your education is over and not pursue certain things that you would be limited to or excluded from based upon not having that degree. Or it's also kind of talking in ideal scenario format where, you know, now with AI becoming more and more and more integrated into daily life, that when you fill out job applications online, it's the simple fact that there's form sections that you're filling in where your degree is, and there's a drop down, highest level of education and this and that. And with AI, there's a chance that nobody's even going to see your application if it hasn't met the metrics that they've set on their end, where it's going to sift out and kick some to the side and accept some in. So I am torn always on this subject because I'm not opposed to college at all. My kids are loving the college experience that they've had, mainly because they like the really rich education that they're able to get there, like that concentration of knowledge and that intensity and depth of knowledge they've really enjoyed. On the flip side, I feel like we have pushed every kid in the US, at least anyway, or most kids, into like, you will never amount to anything if you don't have a college diploma. And there are some things in here where they talk about it's not for every kid and all of that, that there are plenty of avenues to success that don't involve a college diploma. But I can completely see that. It's like we can talk in ideal terms all day long about how, you know, a rich self-directed education can take you almost anywhere. You probably won't be a brain surgeon, thankfully. Like there's still a process for that. But in reality, if society doesn't acknowledge that education that you've worked so hard to achieve, there still might be some roadblocks for you there. So I'm always conflicted on those kinds of things when we talk about this topic.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue to my next comment. So still on that same page 4, the quote says, "A college degree proves that you can survive 4 years at an institution. It's a piece of paper that says, I followed a prescribed path to success." And for me, I was like, well, is that really what it says? Like, I'm not sure that I believe that's what it says. And I'm not sure that I actually believe that a college diploma in and of itself really says all that much. But at the end of the day, it is the best form of proof that we have that says, yeah, you broadened your horizons. Like you left your neighborhood and you had to be surrounded and talk to and interact with people outside of your neighborhood that you grew up in and outside of your parents' political beliefs. You transition from living at home with your parents or, you know, whoever your caretakers are, into more independent living, and hopefully you learn some stuff along the way. Right? Like a college degree, it doesn't guarantee that you're an expert in anything. It doesn't guarantee that you learned anything specific, but it does guarantee that you at least showed up occasionally and you learned a little bit of something. And that is, whether we like it or not, in this society, it's worth a lot more than like, well, I'm certified by YouTube because I watched a lot of great lectures. Like,
I mean, is it possible to gather the same amount of knowledge with a library card and TED Talks and YouTube that equals a college diploma? Absolutely. But it's hard to quantify that to an employer or whatever else. I mean, there's these kind of universally accepted documents or credentials that open doors in our society. And that's where it gets a little bit tough. So I think there's plenty of ways to be successful without having gone to college, but it will probably look like a very different route. And I have some other thoughts on that as we kind of like dig in deeper as far as how to be more successful in that way. But I think it comes up later in some of our reading and some of our notes. But yeah, so I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, it speaks to motivation, which is also something that comes up a little bit later in this section, right? Like it takes a pretty unique 18 or 19-year-old to be able to self-motivate to the level that you might on a college campus, right? Like there's a difference between the amount of motivation it requires to be like, yeah, I want to be here and I want to go to these classes and I want to attend and get what I can out of it within this structure that's provided for me. And the kid who's like, yeah, I don't need that structure. I'm going to take all of these classes and I'm going to do all of this research. Like, this is totally what I want to do at 19 years old. Like, yeah. On page 6, the next page, I said, he's going through and he's implying that going to college is purchasing peer community. And for me, I was like, I don't, again, like I call bullshit on that. Like, you're still self-selecting your communities in college. Like, college is not like elementary school. Yeah. I mean, like, it's not elementary school where you get dropped off and you're in this classroom with these kids for 8 hours a day. Like when you go to university or a 4-year college, like you pick your hobbies and your interests and, even your course studies, if you end up making friends that maybe you have a lot of the same classes together within your major. But I just don't feel like that idea of picking your community from your hobbies and interests is unique to self-directed learners. Like my closest friend, we did mock trial for fun together in university, right? It wasn't a class. We didn't get credit for it. We just did mock trial because it was fun and just these kinds of things. I'm like, again, like my part-time job, I stayed friends with people from that. And that was a job that I picked because I liked it. And the people that I volunteered with and, I stayed friends with them. But I picked that. Like it wasn't a class. I didn't get school credit for volunteering. I picked that and I spent my time doing it, kind of thing.
They weren't accidents. It was very intentional choices.
Yeah. And for me, it's like, it wasn't because I paid to go to university. It was because when I was there, I wanted to volunteer and there were other people who also wanted to volunteer. And so we volunteered on these things together. And I don't really see how that's different than choosing to volunteer wherever you happen to be. And there being other people that also choose to volunteer. And then some of them you like, and some of them you're like, please don't be on the same group with me. Please don't be in the same group. I do not want to paint a building with you.
This does not sound like my idea of fun. So we both made notes on page 7. You've got more robust notes than I do, Amanda. What were your thoughts on 7?
Well, also, I'm going to say I learned how to do voice to text for my notes. So now it's like so much easier for me to put in robust notes, like exactly what I'm thinking, so that when we get to this point, I'm not like, wait, I thought something.
Why did I write that down?
Let me go back and reread that whole page. Like that would not a good podcast make. So yeah, the top of page 7, it starts with proposition number 4, skipping college isn't the best idea for everyone. And I don't think anyone can argue that. I mean, like for me, that's like an obvious, like no-brainer statement. Skipping college is not for everyone. I do feel, right, that trade schools and certification programs can definitely be better for some. But I also think that I would still, for the most part, say it's probably wise to go ahead and just get the 4-year degree at that age, for when you need it later. Like, there's no guarantee you're going to need it later, but if you go into some kind of a trade or certification program, the reality is most of the time, not always, but most of the time, those are very physically intensive jobs. And people are living into their 80s and their 90s these days. I see a lot of people who, by the time they hit their mid 30s or their 40s, like, it's hard to keep going at these physically intensive jobs. And the certification was fine when they were doing the physical work. But when they hit their mid 30s, their 40s, maybe they're thinking, I'll move into management. Now's a good time to move into management. And then you get into this issue of like, well, management wants you to have the 4-year degree. They don't care how long you've worked there. You're going up against someone who has some work experience or an internship or practical experience and a 4-year degree. And now suddenly you don't have the 4-year degree and you're at this disadvantage. And I have seen so many people who are like, well, I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to use my work experience to get that 4-year degree. And it's freaking hard.
Yeah.
Like, once you're a grown up with grown up responsibilities in your family and you're trying to support them and you're trying to squeeze school in, and even the best programs that give tons of work life experience to go towards your 4-year degree, it's hard. Like, I'm just such a proponent, like, by all means, get the trade thing, but go to your local state school, like Chino State or whatever, something. It doesn't need to be, at this point, like, it doesn't need to be an Ivy League school education. It doesn't even need to be your best state school education. Like, just go get that easy 4-year degree, the cheapest version you can get, and file it away. So in 20 years, when you're like, okay, I want to move into management and it says 4-year degree required or 4-year degree preferred, you're like, oh yeah, here it is. Yeah, here it is. Check a box. Like,
Yeah. I mean, full disclosure, that's what I did. Like, I got a degree thinking, I'm married, I have a very stable income through marriage, but things happen. How many times do we see women or the stay-at-home partner who's completely left in the lurch when something happens through illness, through infidelity, through whatever, and then they are completely screwed. And so I thought, this is my insurance policy. I didn't get a college degree because I had some great intention to use it at the time, but it was an insurance policy in case I needed it for the future. I haven't needed it yet, but you never know. Like, it's still there. I still have it. It's not expiring. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, that's it. They don't expire, like, they know, like, it never expires, and you never know when you might need to pull it out.
Yeah, exactly. There's a list that starts on 7 and goes to 8 that talks about people who maybe should rethink college or give college at least a second thought. So the first one that I noted was, if you suspect that becoming a doctor, lawyer, architect, scientist, professor, or financier is really somebody else's goal for you. And I thought, oh, how important is that, right? If you're doing this because of family pressure, because of cultural pressure, things like that we all know kind of the stereotypical jokes about certain cultures where it's like, you can only be a doctor or a lawyer or this or that. So if it's not what you want to do and you are going to end up stuck in this hamster wheel of life forever because somebody else wants you to do this thing, it's a time to maybe step back. But the other one that I really liked in this list was, you're simply unsure about everything. And I thought, for me, that's one of my big drawbacks with the price tag of the full college experience that so many kids are signing up for these days. And I'm looking at, we lived in South Florida for a really long time, these kids that are going to University of Florida, that are going to FSU. And yes, they're state schools, but they're still not cheap. These kids are still coming out of there, in a lot of cases, with a lot of debt. And most 17-year-olds do not know their ass from their elbow. Like, they just freaking don't, And it's like, they're making this huge commitment at that time, and this huge commitment to debt and a career path and all of this. And once you have the debt, it's really hard to change the career path, because now you're working in the career that you found out you really don't like. in order to pay the debt. And it's just this cyclical scene of misery. So it does talk a little bit and a little bit further ahead about gap years. And I think for the you're simply unsure about everything people, that gap year experience can be incredible. I'm not talking about gap year in Ibiza. I'm talking gap year. Like there's some.
You know what? I actually, and this might be where one of those areas where we differ, because I think if you want to take a gap year in Ibiza, and that's where like go on with your bad self. If you need to go and drink and party and like go all in for a year or two before you buckle down for college and make the most and get the most out of college, like I think that's a great use of your gap year. If you want to go, I have a friend who gap yeared and volunteered in the Amazon, like helping people, and you can go that route too, right? There are all kinds of gap years you can take. But I took issue with this idea that like gap year isn't part of a 4-year college experience. I actually firmly believe that the US should better embrace gap years and this idea that kids should take a little bit of time off before
in
going
the real world.
like before then diving into university. And I
For
know
the
that's
record,
a very like that's not an American thing at all.
Yeah. So for the record, I did take the party year multiple years and I had a lot of fun. I just never called it a gap year. So I'm glad that you have ordained my very reckless couple of years of behavior as a gap year. Thank you very much. I
You're
was
welcome.
thinking more Greenpeace, but if you want to call what I did a gap year, I will gladly accept that label.
I mean, I think that's the thing, right? Different people have different needs at the age of 17 or 18, and they are not all ready to buckle down and go all in. And that can look so many different ways. The important part of a gap year to me is that you are ready for that next step. You're ready to get the most out of your college experience. And whatever that looks like for you, whether that's this deep desire to travel the world and volunteer and do this, or it's a desire to be like, thank God I'm out of school. Like, let's just have some fucking fun and not have any deadlines and whatever. Like, if your parents are willing to help you make that happen, or you got a way to fund it without having to sleep on the street, like by all means, like go on with your bad self. If the only option to fund it is sleeping on the street, I think you should rethink. But again, it's your life. So I suppose go on with your bad self.
All right. So then from 12 to 14, we get a little bit of backstory about Blake. And so it talks about the fact that he went to UC Berkeley, started as an astrophysics major, and then read a John Taylor Gatto book that just kind of changed his path. And John Taylor Gatto is one of those founding fathers of homeschooling, right? Up there with John Holt, whose book we read and disliked on many levels. But John Taylor Gatto is like a different variation of that, a different flavor of that kind of original homeschool process and unschooling and self-directed learning and things like that. So that changed his mentality about education. And then there's a line in here that says, I pestered the UC Berkeley administration until they let me design my own major in alternative education. So it reminded me a lot of Brown when we had Jonathan Mooney on and his experience at Brown. So I thought that was interesting. And he basically goes on till graduation in 2004, building this own path for himself as far as learning about self-directed learning and higher education and how people learn and all that good kind of stuff. And then he says on 14, finally, I realized that my self-directed awakening, the experience that created my most positive associations with college, wasn't a phenomenon unique to college. In fact, there was an entire world of young adults seeking and finding self-directed success, the unschoolers. A little later on the page, these young adults were doing everything that I had done at Berkeley, learning deeply, developing mastery, becoming exposed to new friends, adventuring, building work experience, and following their passions without the college price tag. So I agree with most of what's been said there, but he still has the piece of paper at the end of it, right? Like he still
and from Berkeley, which is like hella hard to get into. It is very well respected. It's a state school, but it is very well respected. It is very hard to get into. They accept less than 5% of the students that apply there. Like that's the part I was like, I really struggle when people who have gone to schools like MIT and Berkeley and, and they've gone and then they're like, but you don't need to go to college. You don't need the degree. Just have this amazing experience and you'll have so much success. And I'm like, yeah, F you. Like, how about I don't know. How about like acknowledge the insane amounts of privilege that you're coming into this conversation with? I'm struggling a little bit with the amount of privilege that is baked into this book.
There you go. But I just thought it was an interesting kind of backstory about who your author is, because every author comes to a book or any project or speaking engagement, whatever, with obviously their own life experience that has led them to that point. So I felt like that was important to kind of drop into the conversation for context for anyone listening.
Yeah. No, it's true. And just like I said, I started the episode with saying like where my context is, right? Where my background is coming. And it does help. Well, yeah, it's interesting to know where he's coming from as well, which is not super far away from where I came from, but we've gotten to very different places of what we recommend people do. Okay, so before we get into the next section, so that kind of wraps up that section. Before we get into the next section, we want to make sure you know that we have a Patreon community. Did you know? We would love to invite you to come join us and continue the discussion over there. So if you join the Patreon community, we have like just like a basic benefactor level of like, hey, you're doing awesome work and I really appreciate it. You can do the first tier, which is $7, and that gets you our monthly unit study, which is like, I'm not a big unit studies person, and I even think it's really awesome. We're actually going to take some time off in December and do just some unit study stuff with it and some other book reading and stuff. I'm pretty excited and looking forward to that. And then also we have our VIP tier because, you know, it's so VIP at $12 a month. But for a whopping $12 a month, you also get the unit study, but then you get 2 like actual live virtual things with us. Like technology is so good these days, right? These days, like that's one of the best things that came out of the pandemic. You can really create great experiences and live experiences with people online. So we have both a monthly Q&A type session where you can come and pick our brains and ask for recommendations and talk about what you've got going on. And we'll happily talk about what we've got going on. And then we also have like just a happy hour social kind of thing. It's so nice to just get a drink, adult beverage or otherwise, and show up however you want. If you want to tell your family that you're doing something important and you get super cute and come join us, that's fine. And if you're like, I barely survived the day and I'm going to crawl in there with like baby food still stuck in my hair and just, you know, like lock the door so no one can, like they might be able to stick their fingers under the door, but they can't get in the door. That's also fine.
Kind of how we showed up last night, minus the baby food. We're both past that stage. But
it's true. Last night we were both looking a little rough, but it was a great, I mean, you know, come together for happy hour. And it's nice to just have other adults and adult conversation and, you know, people that get you and understand you. And there's no talk about what you're doing at church this weekend. So yeah, we would love to have you come join us. Again, it's on Patreon. It's a little hard to find if you just go search Patreon, but you can definitely find the links from our website, which is homeschoolmomsunfiltered.com. I know it's really hard to figure out. Also from like our social media, we're on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and all of those things, but most of them have like a link to the Patreon. So we'd love to have you join us.
Come hang out. We'd love to meet you.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome. All right. So next section, good reasons to skip college. Yeah. So I liked the what if scenario that the chapter started off here with, mainly just because I love a good what if scenario. Like I love, so I've said so many times I'm a history nerd. Like I love playing that in classes with other history nerds when I'm teaching. And like we'll do like World War II history. Like what if Churchill was never the prime minister? Like how would everything have looked different? What if Hitler had been accepted into art school? And we do like these huge what if scenarios that we go through. So I love a good what if. So this one was fun for me. But you've got some thoughts about it too, Amanda. What do you think?
Well, I will say from that regard, I appreciate it. And we do that as well. Like if you suddenly had this much money, what would you do with it? Or like if this kind of thing. So yeah, we do some of that in our house as well. And I think we'll have to do a bit more of the history kind of stuff because I'm positive that my kiddo would love that. In this specific section, so it goes from page 19 to 21. And he starts off, it's what could you do with $20,000? So he sets up this scenario, like say you committed to going to a college or university, and then at the last minute they shut down and to say, we're so sorry, they give you $20,000 a year for 4 years, and you can use it to further your education with the caveat that you cannot enroll in another school. So what are you going to do? And my first thing was, I think it's really important to acknowledge the fact that this book was published in 2012. So the amounts are wildly outdated. I mean, like wildly. I think one of the very first actual amounts that he uses is he's going to spend $750 per month on room, board, and transportation in a thriving city. And I was just like,
okay, so the funny thing is, I saw your note only maybe like an hour before we were going to record. So I sent him a quick email. He hasn't answered yet. But I was like, out of curiosity, what are you paying these days for your life, like room, board? And I referenced that line from the book. I haven't heard back from him yet, but I'm hoping by next week I'll have an answer for you, because I follow Blake on social media, on TikTok and on Instagram and stuff. And his handle on TikTok, I think, is Dirtbag Rich, right? So he is one who like rents a room with a cot and like is perfectly content to do that. And he'll be in, right now, I think he's in Brussels or Switzerland or something. And he's like, I would so much rather have an afternoon that costs me nothing, where I just go on a trail run in the Alps or something. And so he does. He lives that lifestyle of like, my world possessions are in a backpack and I kick around. And so he will be in, you know, like Phuket, Thailand. And so, yeah, he is paying that, but he's not paying it in the States. I
say outside of the United States. I would like you to show me a thriving city in the United States where you can rent a room.
Oh, no
even
way.
Just the room for $750.
Right.
Like, I know, I'm trying to think back. When was it? It was like 2009. I rented an actual apartment with a bedroom and a living room and a kitchen, an eat-in kitchen and a bathroom, right? And it even had a yard for my dog. And I paid like $650 a month for that apartment in Chicago. So I know back then you could go quite far with that, right? I mean, I had a true apartment. Now, granted, I only had a heater in the kitchen, and that meant that in the winter I had snow in my entryway. I had to shovel out my entryway before I could go outside. But those were trade-offs I was willing to make. But there's just no way. And
right.
Where I live now, I see moms all the time who are like, I just left my husband or I just left my partner and I just need a room to rent. Does anyone know where I can rent a room for under $1,200? You know, like my max budget is $1,200 a month for just a room. Is anyone renting out? And people are always like, maybe look in Tijuana, maybe go to Arizona. Like, it's not happening here. Like, you weren't like, and food is so expensive right now. Like, even if you're shopping just at Aldi and the 99-cent store, if you still have one, all of ours just closed. Like the ones that carry food. Like, I have no idea where someone is able to live in the United States in a thriving city for $750. I mean, where we live, you could pay close to $750 a month just for your parking.
And I think so from following, I mean, Blake and I aren't like besties, but just from following his movement through posts on social media, I don't think he's in the US very much. So I think that's a huge part of it. So I know for a while he was doing like this whole like bicycling trip through Patagonia, and they were just staying at like little inns along the way and stuff like that. So I think part of the reason that I think his philosophy works is that that's the lifestyle that he lives, and that's the lifestyle that he has in mind.
Lifestyle, yeah.
And not to say, I mean, there's the example that we'll come up to later about this kid who gets a job with a company. It's not to say that you can only live in straw huts in Thailand if you don't have a college degree. Like, there's definitely an in between there. But that, I think, is typically kind of the way he approaches his lifestyle and his movement. So yeah, he's all about very budget life and more having rich experiences and rich friendships and things like that, as opposed to the apartment or the house or the car or whatever it might be. So
yeah. I mean, I like, even still, I mean, you don't have to have a nice anything, you know? I mean, like, my brother's living in a shoebox. He's in one of those micro apartments in the city, and he would love to be somewhere down around the 750. I mean, he's in a micro apartment and street parking only, and
it's crazy how expensive everything is.
Yeah.
Well, I hope he answers me with current numbers and like how but maybe he'll give us some detail. I would love to be able to report back. I'll have to let him know that it came up today because I saw it in the notes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, it kind of reminds me a little off topic, but I was in a group and someone was talking about world schooling and where you could do it affordably. And someone else said like, well, we've been in Costa Rica, but it's way more expensive than we were expecting. And we need to go somewhere else. Like, where can we go affordably that we can do it all for under 2,000 a month? And someone else came on, like a bunch of people were kind of dogpiling saying like, oh, Costa Rica is really affordable considering like we're doing it in Europe and Costa Rica is so much cheaper, like just different things like that, which is not necessarily true. Like there was a whole, and someone else came on and was like, all of the things you're talking about, all the experiences you're referencing of how affordable it was, they were 10 plus years ago. Like worldwide inflation has increased the cost of everything everywhere. And to continue to insist that it's only happened in the United States or it's only happened in the UK is like, pull your head out of the sand. Worldwide inflation, it's big, right? So
yeah.
That applies to this. And there were some interesting things. He talks about how much he would spend for a literary feast and just some other things. I like how much he's spending on his phone and his internet and some of the things I was like, oh, I'd love to be able to get internet for that. It's one of those things. It's fine. It's interesting to talk about and think about. Maybe it helps someone think in a way that they wouldn't normally think.
I think for me, that was the big thing when I read this book was, we were 99.5% unschooling at the time that I read this. And we were basically there, but there was like this just fear of what if they want to go to college? What if they need to go to college? Is that possible as an unschooler? And so this book kind of got me the rest of the way there to be like, of course it's possible. And I've proven it's possible because they're all doing college stuff and they're all loving life. But when you are new in homeschooling and then unschooling on top of it is kind of this like dirt road of homeschooling, right? As far as, I don't mean quality wise, but just like the off the beaten path reference.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you need to look for signs or people who are going to tell you like, no, it's possible and it's going to work. And so for me, that was part of this, was just allowing me to kind of shift my thinking like another degree, which was so helpful for me at that point because we were so close to just really being comfortable with what we were doing, or at least for me. And so that was great, which I loved.
Yeah.
So
and I can see that. I guess, for me, I don't have any questions or concerns about whether or not you can unschool and then still go on to successfully participate in college. Like, I think that's absolutely possible. I also think it's possible to unschool in a way that your kids are completely unprepared to successfully succeed in college, right? Just like I think it's possible for them to go to public school and be completely prepared for college and to go to public school and be completely unprepared for college. I think any of these paths, depending on how you do it and how you go forward with it, they can be completely ready or completely not ready. So I guess I don't have a question around that. It's just, it doesn't work for us. It's not how I see us wanting to do things. And I'm okay with that.
So 25, we referenced earlier gap years, which Amanda said my time drinking and experimenting with a lot of other substances in my body counted as a gap year. So I feel much better about that right now. So that works. But basically he's saying, skipping college isn't an all or nothing proposal. You can take a gap year or a 2-year. Like his basic thought is college isn't going anywhere. So if you are one of these kids that has no freaking clue what you want to do with yourself, which is totally fine. There's plenty of grownups that don't know what they want to do with themselves. Don't feel like you need to pin it down to something that needs to happen right now because it's not going anywhere. You can take some time. And through your gap year experience, you're likely, or possibly at least, going to find what makes you tick, right? What do you find interesting? What do you dislike? What maybe you thought you liked something and you don't like it. So I thought that was an interesting discussion that occurred there on gap years. And then there was just a comment here on page 30, a couple of pages later, that said, just as oxen and then forklifts replaced simple physical labor, computers are replacing simple intellectual labor. And so this is part of a whole kind of discussion about choosing a career or choosing a path that isn't easily replaceable by outsourcing it to another country or having it automated or something like that. What I took from it, I kind of like having these little mantras that stick with me. And so Sometimes I talk about the fact that we are educating, or some people are educating their kids for a world that doesn't exist anymore. We see these conversations all the time, like, should I let my kid use a calculator? The reality is your kid's going to have a calculator their whole life. Or should I let my kid Google something? The reality is this is the world that you're releasing them into. You're educating them for the world that you grew up in because that's what you know. And so I kind of like this, like I have in my head, like, are you educating your kid for a world where oxen pull things or forklifts move things, right? Like, how are you structuring your educational journey? And so I just thought that's kind of like one of those good, like, checkpoint things sometimes if you're questioning, should I be allowing them access to this, or should we be doing this way? And it's like, well, what world are you preparing your kids to enter? Because that's the one they need to be prepared for, not the one that's ideal, not the one that you experienced, not the one that the public school is doing, but what is the world that your kids are actually going to go into and function in?
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I like that. And understanding that, like, just because technology is there, like what that looks like, it's not clear cut, and that's okay. But keeping that in mind, I think that's a great point. My next point was then just kind of 31, 32. So there's a quote, page 31, he says, but anyone who witnessed the 2008 recession saw a huge number of supposedly safe government and corporate positions slashed, manufacturing jobs disappear, grants evaporate, and retirement accounts halve. It may be cliched to declare that we live in an age of uncertainty, but it's cliched because it's true. And he's not wrong. But for me, I was just like, well, to me, he really sounds like a young adult, who he was at the time, right? He's in his early or mid 20s, late 20s. He sounds like he was really traumatized by the 2008 recession. Like, it doesn't really matter how well you survived or how well you didn't weather the recession. Like, you're going to have another one and another one, and you're going to have to live through another one in your life. Like, that's just how it goes, right? We made it through the Great Recession, and we had the pandemic and the recession that went with it. And they're talking about it being time for another one. And a lot of people are like, oh, but I mean, the reality is that was several years ago at this point, whether we like it or not. And there will be a market adjustment, and that will play out in a lot of different ways. And like, I just feel like that's kind of one of those things. You can always be worried about the worst of times, or you can just know that those things are a reality, right? And you do the best you can at the time. And it's always been a time of uncertainty, right? Whether it was pre-industrial revolution and it was uncertainty because we didn't know how to actually treat germs and bugs, or if it was post-industrial revolution and it was uncertainty because there was constantly new inventions and advancements in how things worked. Yeah.
I think sometimes those things become more traumatic or more impactful depending on where you are in your life. So I was the youngest of my friend group when the '08 recession happened. Ironically, youngest of my friend group, but first to have a baby. So we had bought a house literally like weeks before the bubble burst in Florida. And I was like 5 months pregnant. And so it was like, I think if you are where we are today, where hopefully there's some sense of security and you have a stable home and all that kind of stuff, then when they come along, it's like, oh, this is bad. This is really bad. This is uncomfortable. Like, this sucks. But when you're like, for those that had just launched and didn't have a strong foundation, and then that weak foundation got completely washed out from them. And depending on where you lived too, right? Like Florida was one of the worst. Arizona was one of the worst. Las Vegas, where everything was just destroyed by that. And it looked like Hooverville freaking where we lived, with like, because all the houses were in foreclosure. In the meantime, you're surrounded by houses that are like falling apart, and they just sat, and the banks were so backed up from foreclosures that there was nothing they could do about it. So they just sat there. So yeah, I think it just kind of depends. Like, people who are in a different financial position right now are feeling this squeeze differently than people who have a little bit more security now. And so I could see where, if he's young and like having gotten it, like that really does shape so much in that time frame, because it was a really shitty time.
It was, I just feel like that's about perspective and how you approach things. Like I got laid off. I worked in nonprofit, I worked in grants, and you're right, the grants dried up and I had no job and no one was hiring fundraisers, right? Like
Yep.
the Great Recession was not the time to get a job as a fundraiser.
And get money from people who had no money. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But at the end of the day, for me, it was just proof that like it was hard times and you had to really tighten up the purse strings and you had to get creative about things and you had to do things that you probably wouldn't have otherwise and you had to hustle. But it got better. And when the economy picked up and things got better, you dug your way out and you went on. And like I wasn't that worried financially during the pandemic when that kind of stuff was happening because it was that thing of like, well, like what's the worst that happens? You lose your job and we have to figure it all out. But at the end of the day, like we will figure it out. We always figure it out, and then when it's all done, we move on. Like you just figure it out and you keep marching forward. But not everyone approaches things that way.
Silver lining, Amanda. Right?
it'll be fine. You'll figure it out and you'll move on. That's my life motto. That and life sucks and then you die, which I tell my kid fairly often. So it's a little bit of an irony there, but yeah.
You made it work. All right, we have similar notes on 33. He tells the story about this unschooler kid who loved to play games, etc., gets an internship at Game Lab in New York City, and then eventually gets hired there and tries
at 16.
to go to,
gets hired full time to work there at 16. Yeah.
And then becomes like one of the top Magic the Gathering card players in the country, which is ironic because we're literally sitting in Poland to go to a Pokemon tournament this weekend. So I get that world. So, and then at 17, he decides to go to college. He goes to Parsons for design school on scholarship, didn't love it, ends up leaving there, decides to go back to what he loves. And he is now 21 and works as a lead designer for Playmatics, a computer gaming startup. So that was obviously in 2012, but that's the story that we have. So we have different thoughts about this, which is shocking, Amanda. So you want to go with yours first? And I'll share mine.
Yeah, I mean, I just typed up like, so this is all well and good, but these are exceptions, right? I think my kid is amazing, but most of our kids aren't prodigies or geniuses, and the ones that are, even then statistically, are unlikely to have this sort of success. For me, these stories are anomalies. They're outliers. They're no different than the stories of homeschool kids earning advanced degrees at the age most kids are just starting to think about college. And we aren't pushing all of our kids to become this kind of outlier. Like, well, what do you mean you don't have your master's degree by the time you're 16? What do you mean you don't have your PhD before you're 18? Like, come on, get on it. We're not expecting that. So why are we expecting hordes of kids to forgo college and get recruited into high-paying jobs before most kids are even like sure what they actually really want to major in college? Like, I just don't understand this idea that like we take some outliers and anomalies and push our kids all towards this one direction when we wouldn't do it if it was academic wise. Like we're not expecting all kids to finish their master's or PhD before the age of 18, but yet we're expecting them to like forgo university and become wildly successful entrepreneurs. I don't agree.
Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing is I hadn't looked it up before, but now I was like, I want to pull up this person's, I think I'm on the right LinkedIn profile, but it looks like lead game designer at Playmatics, right? So that would be him. But this shows that he ended up, if this is him, that he went to Harvard Business School.
No, you can't do that.
Okay, so hold on. This is funny. Game Lab from 2003 to 2007. Then Playmatics. There's a thing here in game designer. Okay. Playmatics 2010 to 2012. Then went to Power. So that's got to be him, right? Because it's the same name.
Yeah.
And those two things line up. So let me see here, because there was something here about Harvard Business School. So let me say education. So it says he went to Parsons, which, oh, no, Harvard Business School certificate from the Management Academy. Okay. So that makes sense. Okay. And then we see Parsons here as well, but it doesn't look like he graduated from Parsons. It just shows that he went to Parsons. So there's something here. Okay. So that was interesting because I was like, oh my gosh, wouldn't that be like quite the ironic twist? So it says now he's a design director at Second Dinner, which is something to do with video games or games in general that I don't know about. But anyway, I was just thinking when you were talking about it, I'm like, I wonder how this all panned out over time, right? Since it's so old,
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. And I mean, I do know personally, I know a couple video game designers and I know some developers, right? And some of them have their degrees so that they can move up and some of them don't. And they're doing perfectly fine without a degree. But again, for me, it's just that thing of like, just because there are a few outliers where this works, like why are we pushing for that? We would seriously side-eye people if suddenly everyone was like, well, I don't know why your kid doesn't have their master's degree by the time they're 17, because I read this story about a girl who was homeschooled and she had her master's degree when she got it when she was 17. Like we would be like, oh, come on, that is not realistic. Like we are not, but like, why is it that the other way of like, well, we should unschool and be wildly successful, and like that expectation is more acceptable than like crazy high academic expectations? Like I think they're both inappropriate.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, because I think the same way sometimes when they point out like people who are homeschooled, like it goes around in the groups, like, how will your homeschooled child succeed in the real world? And it's a thing of Simone Biles. And I'm like, yeah, but Simone Biles was homeschooled because she wasn't the goat of gymnastics because she was homeschooled. She was homeschooled because she needed that time, because she showed that promise, and et cetera, et cetera. So, you kind of, sometimes those examples are backwards, but people like to kind of mindlessly share those memes. So it's interesting when he talks in this section about, this guy who tries going to college and it's not a good fit, and this, that, and the other thing. And it's been interesting because I kind of feel like there's a little bit of like a chicken or the egg situation. And I'll hold my thoughts. I saw that you had some comments later about financials and stuff like that. I'll hold my thoughts for that. Let's keep going and I'll get there. I think it'll make more sense there. So you have something on 34.
Yeah. So on 34, he's talking about all of these experiences that self-directed learners have and how the experiences and work experience, life experience, etc., will get you the job. And I kind of alluded to it before, but again, I have personally seen so many times where experience only takes you so far when applying for jobs, right? Without that 4-year degree, you're just at a disadvantage. Like I know someone who has this certification and they're like less than 1,000 people in the entire world that have this certification. And it takes years to do all of the work necessary and to sit the test and all of this stuff to get the certification in this industry. And yes, there are jobs that they have to have that certification to get the job, but they never get the job because someone else also has a 4-year degree and that certification, right? And like I have seen it so many times that I'm like, I have a really hard time with this idea that anytime soon in the United States, work experience will be enough in the vast majority of jobs. Like, sure, sometimes, but not in the vast majority.
I mean, there was a thing I remember years ago when Jon Stewart still had the Daily Show full time. He did this whole piece. I used to like it when he used his forum or his platform and his popularity to spotlight situations, right? So he did a lot with 9/11 survivors who were fighting for medical benefits and things like that. And he would have people on and kind of do those things. And he did a thing one time, and it was all veterans who were combat medics who saw absolutely horrific things and worked under pressure and under circumstances that we couldn't even fathom. And when they came back to the US, they weren't qualified to be an EMT. They would have to go to school. And it's like, how on earth can that, which is such an extreme variation, but even that didn't translate over. And so we definitely have a problem with, like, I love the philosophy of most of what's in the book, but I'm still stuck where you're stuck in a lot of ways of like, I agree with so much of what's in here, but then there's the reality of living in the world where you can stand on your soapbox all day long and say, well, principally, it shouldn't make a difference, right? But then at the same time, it's like you're shouting into the wind, because that's just kind of how our culture works in a lot of ways. So you have to be prepared for the fact that if you choose that route, there will probably be repercussions later of being excluded from something or not being eligible for something because you have chosen this route. And for some people that's totally fine, and for some people it's not. But it's just kind of knowing that those things exist.
Yeah. And I guess I should also be totally honest with the fact that I am too much of a realist in a lot of ways. And so these kinds of books just really, I'm like, but that's not realistic. Like, that's not realistic. And yet I want to dream for a better world. I want to imagine a better world. I want to help work towards a better world. But I also, I spend a lot of time thinking about the reality of things. So
you spend a lot of time in the real world.
Yeah, I do. I do. Okay, so my next one was on page 36 and 37. And this like just really got me fired up. I was like, I got lots of notes. I went researching.
You'll notice conversely, I don't have any notes saying like, oh, I loved this section. I will freely admit that.
Yeah. So he is talking on these 2 pages and a little more. He's talking about whether or not college graduates make more money than non-graduates. And he says, quote, on average, yes, they do, but there are a few important caveats. And he goes into making his points about it. And I was just kind of like counterpointing it of like, so one point he makes is that to make the most money, you need to go to a good university. And I mean, yeah, sure. I agree with that. Generally speaking, the better the school, the more well recognized it is, the bigger the paycheck. Like name recognition, brand recognition, it matters. And it also opens you up to a totally different level of alumni network that you are tapping into better paying jobs and more things like that, right? So there is some truth to that. But we interestingly have read some other books and had discussions around the idea that that very much disagreed with this idea. So I find it interesting that like here, I agree with him on that. He's saying it in a negative way. I'm saying it in it's just a reality way. But we've read books that disagreed with that and said it didn't make a huge difference. He goes on to talk about how this really skews the financial numbers because you're looking at people who make a lot more money because they went to Harvard and MIT and whatever. And that makes the amount of money people make look very different. And I was like, well, I would argue that the same could be said for the other way, because you have some really, really wealthy, famous people that are total outliers, but the Zuckerbergs and the Gates and these other people who did not graduate from college, and their billionaire incomes go into these stats of how much people who went to college make or earn. So, I mean, like, I'm not sure that you can disregard it on one side and not disregard it on the other, right? Like, so I was like, okay. But I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just completely talking out of my ass. So I went and did some research, right? And the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and again, this is in the United States, so they have a bunch of different studies, and the ones that I'm going to reference for the most part are from 2022 to 2024. They say the median earnings for a bachelor degree holder are 86% more than those with just a high school diploma. Following the Great Recession, the jobless rate for bachelor degree holders was less than 3%, which was very different from those who did not have a degree. Going a little further back, this was a slightly older statistic from 2015, but that one has the poverty level for bachelor's degree holders was 3.5 times less than those with just a high school diploma. So if you're talking actual like poverty level, you are significantly less likely to be at or below poverty level in the United States if you have a bachelor's degree. And then generally speaking, over the past decade, all net job growth has gone to bachelor's and master's degree holders in the United States. I thought that was maybe the most shocking statistic out of it. I was not really expecting that because we hear so much about like the increased need for plumbers and electricians skilled and trades, like these trades. Yeah. But yeah, all net job growth, even with increasing population and all of that.
Okay. I didn't look at the stats that you're But do you think, because the same thing with plumbers and electricians and things like that, do we think that it's not net job growth though? Because so many of I feel like there was a gap, right? I feel like you had the old timers, quote unquote, who were plumbers, electricians, etc. And then that became not an okay thing for you to be, according to society standards. That's not me saying that. And so many kids were pushed in another direction. But now I feel like those skilled trades jobs are coming back around. And so do you think maybe that the net growth is that we had so many that left the profession due to age, etc.? Then we had a shortage, and then now we've got it kind of resurging a little bit again. I don't know. That maybe it's at least
I think because of but I think because of baby boomers, that's true in everything. I mean, like, it's averaging out everywhere. Like, the baby boomers, they
screwed everything up.
Yeah, they really messed up the numbers. Come on.
Exactly. So I talked before about like having this utopian world where all of these philosophies just work because you wouldn't be excluded from a job or dismissed for some reason for not having a degree. So part of me thought we've had a lot of conversations around college in our house. My kids are, for the most part, keen to go to college, excited about college, etc. My daughter in particular, who was the first one to embark on her college journey, struggled to find somewhere where she felt at home. And she will again, she's only just finishing her 2-year degree, so we'll have to have this issue all over again. But because she was self-directed before she went to college, she was well beyond where the average student was going into college. So it was really difficult for her because the entry point was 25 steps behind where she was. And she was like, I have to go and sit through all this stuff that I've been doing for so long before I can. And it's like, yeah, well, that's kind of how college works. So we've had this whole conversation about kind of this prescribed route. So the interesting thing for me is we do hear stories about unschoolers like this one who did the game stuff in the book, right? Who went to college and it wasn't a fit. And part of me wonders if that's the reason that it's not a fit, right? Is because the freedom of self-directed learning, then when you try to restrain that in some way or try to take steps backwards, it can feel limiting. Conversely, I wonder if part of the reason for the stats that are out there, and this is like, you have actual data, I have like, I wonder, okay, so like I'm just literally wondering out loud, is yes, these are people who went out into the world without a bachelor's degree and were not as successful as those who had a degree, because the golden ticket for so much in this world is the bachelor's, right? Not what you actually learned or anything, but just having, in some cases, just having the paper. Right? Yeah. Exactly. And so part of that is a societal issue, which again, we're not going to fix. So we have to play the game or deal with the consequences in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. But part of me wonders if the people who didn't go to college would have been more successful without a degree if they had the skills to be self-directed, right? If you think about most of those people who went out into the world were not self-directed learners, didn't have the ability to find a resource, get a mentor, do this, do that, right? And kind of do that because the education system that they came from wasn't that thing. And so it's like, because you look at this guy and it's like, okay, he tried to go to college and it didn't work. So he was just like, fine, I'm just going to go back to doing my own thing, which according to LinkedIn seems to still be working pretty well for him. But it's like, he had the ability to self-direct his life because that was the education that he had prior to 18. And so the other people who are leaving and going out into the world with no degree don't have it. Some people will innately have those skills, right? They will innately be go-getter, self-starters, etc. But a lot of them won't, you know? Mm-hmm. And so it's an interesting
homeschooled or otherwise, right? Like,
oh, yeah.
Yeah. And
I'm not talking homeschooled. I'm talking traditional school. Yeah.
I know. I know that that's what you're saying. I'm saying it for the people who are listening. At this point, we're talking like, it doesn't matter if you're homeschooled or if you're in a brick and mortar school, like any educational system can fail you in teaching you these skills. And a lot of people don't innately have them.
Right. Because I wonder what it would look like. Like he talks about these self-directed learners going out and starting a company and doing this and investing and doing that. The average 18-year-old leaves school with none of those skills, right? Mm-hmm. And so without that piece of paper that is the golden ticket, the stats make sense because you don't have the golden ticket. and you don't have the skills to circumvent not having the golden ticket. So it's, and there's no way to prove any of that or measure that in any way, right? But it was just, I had written that down in the margins of my notes when I was reading, was like, imagine a world where everybody who doesn't have a degree has those self-directed skills, has those entrepreneurial skills. Imagine a world where that's part of their education, and what it looks like then for them to go out into the world and not have the degree, but have those skills and see what they could create. Would be interesting to see. But that's not the world we live in, so we still do kind of have to play the game.
It's true. And then for me, one of the things that this brought up, and I don't remember what, we've talked about it in some previous episode. So if you know, feel free to let me know. But that idea of future proofing, because for me, I thought about like, okay, so say you have an 18 or a 19-year-old who was raised with this entrepreneurial mentality and spirit, and they know how to do it, and they go out and they do it, and they're succeeding, and it's going really well. And then you have a great recession or a pandemic or a depression. Like at some point, we're going to have another one. It's going to be awful. And maybe at the point that they have that, they have aging parents who need a lot of support, and they have a big family that they need company medical insurance. And, you know, like for whatever reason, they're in a position where like, okay, it's not the time to try to launch a new business. Like my old business failed, it completely went under. We don't have the money, we don't have the capital to like build something up and wait a year or 2 years for it to be successful. Like I need to just go get a job and a paycheck and company health insurance. Like I just need to go get these things. And then I can start another business once we're back on stable ground. And it's, you know, like if you don't have that degree, how much are they going to care that you had a business that folded during the depression, the recession, the pandemic? Because probably a lot of other people are in that same position, right? And you're in a really tight job market up against people who also have degrees, right? They have some kind of a business degree or something. And so again, that to me, it's that question of, future proofing,
insurance policy.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. The insurance policy.
Yep, exactly. That's 100% why I did it. Right? Yeah. So yeah, I think it's true. All right. So we both have our final note of the week on page 41. So I wrote down, I have a quote that says, without college, you have incredible freedom. You choose your own projects, set your own hours, and learn at your own pace. But with this freedom also comes the need to self-motivate. And I thought, there's so many people that are lacking that, kids, adults, whoever, right? Doesn't matter. For me, it tied in a whole bunch with what we were talking about last week, right? And we talked about goal setting and things like that, and being able to break down goals into tasks and being able to assign timetables to those tasks and stick with them and stuff like that. And yeah, if you don't have those skills, it's going to be a big nut to crack to try and do that. So I always love it when our content kind of dovetails into other stuff when we totally haven't planned it that way. And I was like, that's totally what we just talked about last week. So that was my final thought from page 41.
Yeah. And so then just 2 paragraphs down, there's another paragraph that for me really stuck out. And it says, quote, "Do you think you need to attend college to be motivated? According to DC," which is someone else he's quoted already, "all you actually need is an environment that promotes autonomy. Mastery in a specific field and relatedness. Admittedly, most colleges do offer some level of autonomy, mastery, and relatedness, but college can also become restrictive if, for example, you find a class that exposes you to fascinating new topics, and then the syllabus moves on before you can delve deeply into that issue. At that point, self-directed learning undoubtedly offers a better environment for self-motivation." And I was just like, I think that this point falls flat. Like, why can you not dive into that after your 45-minute class? Like, just because the syllabus moves on and you have to read something, like college and college classes themselves, like they actually take very little of your time. There's a lot of time for other things. Like, I don't understand why you can't be a self-directed learner, learning and diving more into whatever you're interested in while also being in college. Like if you are following his prescribed plan and you're a self-directed learner not in college, I assume that you are working some sort of a job to be able to afford life, right? Like I mean, I assume
expensive.
I assume that you're doing some kind of a job, but yet you're still finding time to do self-directed learning outside of your work hours. So Why, if you're in college, can you not find time to do self-directed learning?
So I didn't pick up on that in the reading the same way that you did, but I will say, like, we've had that experience, especially Astrid, who's my middle kid, where I know, like, her first semester in college, she goes to a Canadian school. They have reading week in the middle of the semester. She's actually on reading week right now. And she was desperately looking forward to reading week because she is a minute scheduler, right? Like, she is goal setting galore. And she was desperately looking forward to reading week because there were personal things that she wanted to attend to. And I don't mean personal like getting her hair done. I mean like personal projects, personal points of interest, curiosities, podcasts she wanted to listen to, like certain things all related to the fields that she's studying and going to school in that she could not fit during the school. And then as reading week approaches, they gave them a funsies assignment to do over reading week that wasn't part of their syllabus, wasn't part of their grading metric. But at the same time, she was like, I have to do it. Like, what, like, if I don't do it, it's not going to look good. It's not going to show that I'm like invested in, you know, whether we like it or not, people form opinions about you on all different things, whether they're fair or not. And she's like, so if I don't do it and I just show up and say, hey, I spent the week exploring things that are really meaningful and personal to me related to this field, I didn't do the assignment, you know that that professor is going to have thoughts about that, right? As far, and it'll impact whether you like it or not. I mean, this is art. This isn't math. It's not like it's right or wrong where it's easy to grade. There's a lot of influence that goes into the grading. So she was like, I have freaking been waiting all this time for reading week so that I could get done X, Y, and Z. And now they gave me some assignment that's like, I don't even care about during reading week. So she ended up, like, we're in the fall semester right now. It's October. She took the January semester off because she, from last year, had so many things stockpiled that she was like, these are things I want to explore and I want to get done for myself. And she's so far ahead in her education. Like, we talk about that all the time. Sometimes she feels this like time crunch. And I'm like, girlfriend, you are so far ahead. Like, there is no, you could take an entire year to do personal projects and you'll be fine. But for her, that was definitely the case where she was like, I cannot find the time to explore the things that I want to explore creatively because of my schedule. It doesn't mean that she dropped out of school. Like, you know, she still goes to school, but we had to have a talk with the dean about finding a way to maneuver that in so that she had that break to do that creatively and then come back into class and do those things. And it meant she did summer class this year and whatever, and that was all fine. But so I'm not saying it can't be done if you're in college, but it did take a little creative maneuvering to do. And to your point, she's a kid, so she doesn't have a full-time job supporting herself or a heavyweight part-time job supporting herself. But likely if she was self-directed, she'd have other commitments as well on that front. Like, she does vend at the farmer's market and she's in like 400 fiber guilds and all that stuff. So she's got that stuff scattered into her schedule as well. But yeah, she did have a really tough time. She looks forward to reading week because she's like, I finally have time to do the things that are meaningful to me again, that I necessarily can't because, you know, in order to, her schooling is supposed to be set up of 8 live hours a week on class and then 12 hours of lab time. And those 12 hours have to be documented for the Canadian government. It's like a whole thing. But for most of the classes that she's taken, there's been no way for her to excel at the level that she does in class with 12 hours of lab time. Her lab time goes to 20, 25 hours sometimes. And she usually ends up with the highest grade in the class, but you can't do it in 12 hours. It's like, it takes that to perform at that level for her.
Yeah. But I would say that in and of itself is self-directed learning, because I would guess that a fair number of her classmates are putting in their 12 hours of lab time and getting their grade and being like, I'm good. Whereas she's like, no, I want to know more. I want to understand it all. I want to do it really well. Like, I'm going to put this time and this effort into it. And yes, she has a lot going on. She has a lot of things she wants to do. But even that is what she's doing in that framework. It's self-directed learning. Just because she chooses to self-direct learning above and beyond over and over, right. You know, it's like,
yeah. I mean, the class itself is self-directed. She chose this. This was her plan. This was her path. This was us looking for something that filled the hunger that she had for certain skills. And so the class itself is self-directed, to your point. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the class itself, and then the amount of time and effort she puts into each class is going
Right.
above and beyond what is necessary to pass. And so, like we were saying before earlier in the episode, the difference between the kids who really get a lot out of university and the kids who don't get a lot out of university are the ones who are self-directed and choose to put in the extra time and effort to get a lot out of it versus just show up and get the paper.
Yeah.
And right, wrong, or otherwise, good, bad, it doesn't matter. In some cases, you'll probably do better in life if you're a self-directed learner, no matter what. And in other cases, like, you just need the piece of paper. So, you know, depending on what you're wanting to do and where you're wanting to go with it, there are different paths. I think for me, ultimately, the vast, vast majority of the time, I think you should just find a way to get the piece of paper. And then if you want to make it a true self-directed learning experience in college and go all in on it, by all means, go that route. And if not, because you actually really want to focus on something that's far more technical and hands-on, like, by all means, go that route. But at least you have that insurance policy. That's not necessarily what the book is advocating.
Right. Yeah. And even though I love the book and it was instrumental for me, the insurance policy thing is very real in the world that we live in. I can take things from the book that I agree with while still realizing that in reality, unfortunately, that's like a huge piece of reality, right? In the actual world that we live in. So I definitely am of two minds when it comes to that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have reached the end of our first episode here. We've got 2 more episodes for this season, 2 more episodes on this book. So it'll be interesting to see where we end up with this. We would love to ask you a favor before you tune out for the day, is just to like and follow us wherever you are. Give a review, give a like, give a follow, give a thumbs up, whatever it is. We're not attention seeking, desperate housewives. We just need, in order to grow the podcast and reach more secular homeschoolers who are out there feeling lost and alone, we need to be more visible. And in the world of algorithms, that's likes and follows and reviews. So we would love it if you could help us just expand our reach a little bit and open up some doors for us. That would be amazing. So thank you. If you could just do that, we're everywhere you could possibly be. If you hang out on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Spotify, YouTube, whatever, we're there. Wherever you are, just Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. Like. We would greatly appreciate it. So thank you so much for joining us. Tune in next week. We'll be continuing our discussion. But in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Yeah. Have a great one.